Hey everybody, and welcome to the day. My name is Mr. Martin and I'm going to be your host for a pretty short video today. I'm not going to do a whole lot of content delivery or defining terms or anything like that. What I wanted to do today is to sort of get to know Seattle and sort of where we fit when it comes to the demographics of the city. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much for the maps. It's been a delight to see how many different locations the Space Needle is in. So that's been kind of fun. I've seen Lake Union drawn as a new lake where downtown is. So really interesting to see sort of in your brain where stuff is in that map. That's going to be a draft, and we're going to ask you to produce another map so that way, or just even to correct the one that you have. That way you'll know exactly where things are in the city. So as we're talking about this unit and we're referencing a lot of the different places in the city, you'll know where they're at. We're also going to have you add a couple of places. You've already got Ballard in there, which is going to be important. West Seattle as a place, Central District, International District. These are all different places that we want you to plug into the map as we move along. So that way it's a reference point that you've created. Now today is more about thinking about Seattle as a whole, like the entire city. And who makes up Seattle as a whole, as opposed to looking at individual groups. So what I want you to do in order to get started with that is to think about what's in your mind when you think about Seattle and the people that are here. So imagine for a second that you have a friend who lives somewhere else and they are thinking about moving to Seattle. And they ask you to describe Seattle and to describe Seattleites to them. Now with Seattle, you might, the place, you might describe the weather and the landscape. But how do you describe the people that live here? If you are going to be describing how they act or sort of what they're like, and also who they are, sort of those demographic categories that we talked about before. Who makes up Seattleites as a whole? What is your descriptor? I want you to pause the video and take a moment, and I want you to write that down. You can do it on a Word document. You can also do it in your journal, and I want you to write down in your mind who is Seattle, who makes up Seattle. Okay, so pause the video and write that down. Now what I want you to do is I want you to go and find out, well, who actually does make up Seattle? What are some of the general characteristics of Seattleites as a whole? We'll be talking about sort of pockets of the city later, but right now I just want you to see Seattle as a whole. So on the Schoology page, there's going to be a document, and there's going to be a link in that document to go to this seattle.gov website, where there is a demographer. It's a position, it's a job, and they've collected all kinds of demographic information about Seattleites. And the interesting thing is they've also compared it to the United States as a whole. So what you can do is sort of go through the list and see what Seattle is like, who makes up Seattle, what are the demographics of our city, but you can also see how that compares to the rest of the country. So in that document, there'll be some instructions as far as making some comparisons. I want you to identify certain aspects of who makes up Seattle. And the other thing is what I want you to do is to compare Seattle using that information to the rest of the country. And also, this is going to give us a reference point for a lot of what we're going to be talking about later. Because you're right now thinking of Seattle as a whole. Like, what are the characteristics of the whole city? And pretty soon what we'll do is we'll kind of take a little bit of a dive. We'll descend into particulars of the city, and we'll start to see that there are pockets that are very different from each other. And this unit is all about exploring, well, why do those pockets exist, and why are they so different from each other? So that's what I'd like you to do, is to understand holistically, so that way we have a frame of reference, a starting point with which to see how Seattle is different within the city. Okay, and so once you have that piece done, the other thing I'd like to know is how are you a part of the demographics of Seattle? To what extent do you fit into those demographic patterns that you saw within that Seattle.gov document? I also want to know how you got here. Now, For example, for me, my story is I was living with my mom in Sacramento, and then when I was 13, she died, and so I moved up to Auburn, Washington, and started living with my dad. So massive change. When we're talking about changes in continuity on my timeline, that's a big change. So now I'm living with my dad in Auburn, Washington. I go to Auburn High School. I then go to Green River Community College down in Auburn, and then transfer to the University of Washington, and I've lived in Seattle ever since then. So lived here for exactly 20 years now. And so that's my story of how I got to Seattle. But I could probably trace back a little bit further. My family's pretty small. So I could trace it a little bit further to that would put me in California. It would then put my family back in Indiana. Not that I know a lot of those folks, but I can kind of trace it back a little bit. And it gets complicated, and there's going to be so many different examples and so many different stories. But we really want to know how you and your family got to West Seattle in particular. So what we're going to do is this week, we're going to put a questionnaire, like a Microsoft Forms document, into Schoology in the Assessment Day page. So there's going to be a couple of questions that are related to the last video. And in addition to that, there's just going to be some questions to kind of get at how did you come to Seattle, and how do you fit into the demographic mix of Seattle. And there's going to be questions about not only your demographics and how you and or your family got here, but a little bit about some like cultural elements, because we can't separate demographics from culture. And so this will help give us a frame of reference. It'll also help you think about sort of how you fit into the bigger picture of the city and how families got here, because we've talked about immigrant communities coming into Seattle. We've talked about those American pioneers that have settled in Seattle. And so we want you thinking about how it is that you got into the city and how you got here into West Seattle and Madison Middle School. Now, of course, there's going to be a whole range of stories. And, I have students that have been adopted. And so, well, what do I do with that? What if I'm adopted and I was born in another country and then was adopted and then moved to the United States? I want you to answer these questions as best as you can, and you can answer them in a way that feels the most right to you. But we just want to get an idea and to get you thinking about how you fit into the mix. That's really it for this week. So not a whole lot when it comes to the video. I'm not delivering a ton of content, but I do want you to go to the Schoology page. There's going to be, for this week, just that form and a discussion question. So the page for the Seattle demographics from seattle.gov. So you're going to go there, do that action, the discussion page, and on Friday, instead of a quiz, like our traditional quiz, there'll be a Microsoft Forms that we'd like you to fill out. Thank you everybody so much for listening. I hope that you have a great rest of your week, and I hope that you have a great weekend. Don't forget, it's Mother's Day on Sunday. So take this opportunity, since you're staying at home, and since you've probably hoarded pounds and pounds of flour, because I can't buy any at the grocery store, perhaps you can make something really nice and special for a mother that is in your life. So have a happy weekend, everybody, and to all the moms out there, happy Mother's Day. We'll see you all next week.